Hey everyone, wherever you're tuning in from today, you are very welcome here on Facebook Live with the Organic Consumers Association. We are continuing our exploration of the coronavirus and its origins and looking at some of the evidence that the mainstream media seems too often to want to downplay. I'm Pat Thomas, and with me today is Andre Leu. Andre is an international director of Regeneration International. He's a longtime organic farmer in Australia. He's a former president of iFoam Organics International and author of the books Poisoning Our Children and The Myths of Safe Pesticides. Andre, welcome.
Oh, hi, Pat, and it's great to be here. And I just want to say hello to everyone who's listening and watching this.
Well, it's so great that we could negotiate the time zones so that we're all together today. Now, I know you're keen to talk about the conclusions that you have come to after combing through this copious research into the origins of the coronavirus. But just to set us up a little bit, I'd like to ask you why this matters to you and what you see as the links between the coronavirus and regenerative agriculture.
Why this matters is because this is probably the greatest disaster that the world has ever seen. We've never had a pandemic on this scale. It's not just, the hundreds of thousands of people who have died and more who will be dying. We know that there's millions of people now who are hungry because of all the economic shutdowns and people who will be dying of starvation. How many people do we know that their careers and jobs have stopped? They've lost their businesses. This is an A-grade disaster, and we need to know why it happened so that we can prevent this ever happening again. This is critical. So to do that, we actually need to get the evidence and find out the science and the real data, not what the mainstream media is peddling. Let's look at the actual evidence. And so that's what myself and others have been doing. We've been combing through, documents and documents and documents. This is like putting a giant jigsaw puzzle together.
That's right. And in terms of, it's interesting because in terms of linking the coronavirus with its origins, a lot of people are going with the sort of food narrative, that stubborn narrative that the virus originated in the wet markets in Wuhan, where all these exotic species are sold. And in that narrative, an individual or individuals picked up the virus at the market and began spreading it exponentially. But how likely is that really?
Once again, we'll look at the real evidence, and what I want to use here is what we call the gold standard in science. This is called peer-reviewed scientific papers, and particularly if they're in highly recognized scientific publications. And the best one for me is from the Lancet, which is the world's premier medical journal. And that paper shows that the first documented patient with this disease went to hospital with pneumonia on December 1. That person had zero contact with the market. Neither did their colleagues or friends. They could not find any link. Then on December 1, 9 days later, they get 3 more patients. 2 of those had zero contact with the market. They couldn't even trace their relatives or friends being at that market. On that day, they got the first person who had contact with the market. Then when you look at the data, you get a small cluster of people from the market, but you continue to get people who have had zero contact with the market. They closed the market down on January 1. And after that, there's no evidence of anyone from the market getting it. Yet, because we know that this virus had been out in Wuhan for at least 9 days before anyone in the market got it, it's circulating all through Wuhan, and closing down the market had zero effect in stopping this pandemic. Zero. So there's The other thing they did is when they closed down the market, they sterilized it and got rid of the animals. There is zero evidence that it came from the market. And what the evidence shows is that people were infected in Wuhan before anyone from the market was infected. And obviously what has happened is one person has gone into the market and infected everybody and caused a cluster. The market is a crowded place with lots of people. You just need one infected person going in there and sneezing and coughing, and bang, you've got the typical cluster like you see in nursing homes and so on. We see it time and time again with this disease. That's all the market is. It's not the source.
And so again, people would say, well, but what about, you know, these wild animals that people are studying or eating or bringing into the market or what have you? Now, as far as I know, this virus hasn't been found in any wild animals. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I've gone through all the data, and you get some papers trying to say, oh, look, you know, this is evidence. But when you look at the actual data of the viruses and how close they are to the virus that causes COVID-19, they are not close. There is not one. So at this stage, despite the fact that they've looked at coronaviruses in bats and pangolins and dogs and mice, they're everywhere. The only one, you know, that they can find is the one in humans. There is nothing in any wild, or can I say livestock animal either.
So it's not like a trapper went out and caught some bats to eat and brought it into the market and started to infect people. This is something that's come from somewhere else. And the reason we know this, I think, is because of the structure of the virus itself, right?
Exactly. Look, can I say that, you know, there's a very good paper that the Chinese government suppressed that showed that there was 0 bats sold in this market. By the way, this is a seafood market. You know, they are really sort of, how can you say, fabricating that this is a wild animal market. It was not. Now, maybe there were some wild animals sold there, but there is 0 evidence that any of those wild animals had the virus that causes COVID-19. On the other hand, where we do have evidence of the closest virus to the one that causes COVID-19, this is found in a bat in Yunnan, which is about 1,000 miles away from Wuhan, by researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in 2013. Now, in February, they released a paper showing that this virus is about 96.2% the same as the virus that causes COVID-19. And, you know, they're trying to say that this one has mutated. Other papers will show that that mutation would take about between 80 to 90 years to happen. So, you know, that's a nonsense to say that the closest virus has mutated naturally. There is 0 evidence of that.
So tell us, go on.
What I want to say too, the other one they started to talk about was pangolins, because they found some similar viruses in pangolins, and most of those were about between 80 and 90% similar. Once again, we're talking about around 100 years or more of mutations, natural mutations, for them to be the same as the virus that causes COVID-19. However, one of these pangolin viruses had a section of it that was identical to the spike protein on the virus that causes COVID-19. Now, this is missing from the bat virus that is close to it. And this spike protein is very important because people can look, imagine in their mind the coronavirus, and you see it's got little spikes on it. That's why they call it corona. Those spikes are what attach to our cells in our bodies and then allow the virus to invade. And the spike protein is sort of like a lock and key system. You've got to have the right spike protein to get into a cell. And what they did is they found this unique spike protein in a pangolin. So then they say, oh, look, the pangolin is the cause. But the rest of it is completely different from the virus. So other researchers then looked at it and said, look, what this is natural recombination. This virus that causes COVID-19 is a cross between the closest bat virus but now it's got the spike protein from this pangolin virus. And they say, look, it's happened naturally. And yes, it's a recombination, and that looks very, very strong. The evidence there is the closest we've got. Now we're getting something that's almost 100% the same as the virus that causes COVID-19. But this recombination could not have happened naturally because, the closest bat virus is very rare. It's only found in a couple of bats in a mine shaft 1,000 miles away from Wuhan. And then the pangolin virus are from Malayan pangolins, which were confiscated by the border police, the customs, and were probably collected, thousands of miles away from China. And there is no way that these two viruses could have recombined, given the fact that the two host animals were probably more than 1,000 miles apart from each other. It's just a scientific nonsense. There is zero scientific evidence to show that these two viruses recombined naturally.
I think that's important to note before we sort of get on to the nitty-gritty of this, that viruses are constantly recombining, in nature, under pressure from the environment or what have you. But the fact that these two elements could not have come together in any other way does suggest that there is some sort of lab creation going on in here. And part of that is this, what they call gain-of-function research, isn't it?
Exactly. And I just want to explain what gain-of-function research is.
Great.
This is where researchers will artificially modify diseases, all sorts of diseases, and make them more dangerous. So, for instance, most of these coronaviruses in bats and pangolins and mice will not infect people because their spike proteins are the wrong style or shape to infect people. And so, for instance, what a lot of researchers, and this includes researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, have been doing is inserting spike proteins into these harmless viruses that will make them dangerous now, because these new spike proteins are the type of spike protein that will allow the virus now to infect people. And we have the papers. They've been doing this research since 2007. And two particular scientific papers, one in 2015 and an even more important paper in 2017, show how they did it. In 2017, they got 8 harmless bat viruses and inserted new spike proteins in them, so they now had the ability to infect people. It's in black and white. They published it. This is what they do. They take harmless bat viruses and they put new spike proteins on them. So now people can get infected by these viruses. They go from harmless to being deadly.
And this is really controversial, isn't it, this gain of function? Because it's ostensibly performed to create the pathogenicity or the transmissibility of a virus, and scientists will say, well, we have to study that to know how the virus behaves. But of course, the way a virus behaves in a lab isn't necessarily how it behaves in the real world anyway. And in the meantime, you have this huge security risk in these labs.
Exactly. And can I say that, in 2014, gain-of-function research was banned in the United States after several hundred scientists wrote to the Obama government saying that this research is too dangerous. We just need one of these organisms, man-made organisms, to escape, and we'll have a global pandemic. So it was banned, but it was reinstated in 2017. And can I say, while it was banned, there's, various organizations in the United States, in Europe, and also in my country, Australia, that were funding the Wuhan Institute of Virology to do this banned research. So it's been going on, and it's not just the Chinese government. Most of our governments are complicit in this. And on top of that, what I want to say too is that why they're saying, look, we need to do it to understand these viruses so we can get cures and vaccines. There's been 30 years of research done on this, and about all that's come out of it is bioweapons. There is zero evidence of any value that's come from this research. And look at the pandemic we have now. Where is all the benefits from 30 years of gain-of-function research to give us the cures and vaccines? They are not there. Everybody's scrambling and panicking to now try and develop something, but we've got a pandemic and we're completely unprepared for it because we've got zero ways to treat it or prevent it. So gain-of-function research has had no upsides and has every sort of downside we can imagine.
So just going back to the origins, assuming that it was something that was created in a lab. In fact, it's not an animal in the market that could have caused this, but someone walking out of a lab could have. Someone inadequately disinfected themselves, or someone, some sort of accidental release into the market could have been the source of this, correct?
Exactly. And we have good evidence now that that lab had poor biosecurity. There's a very good article in the Washington Post that reported on the cable from intelligence sources that went to the lab, and they reported that this lab was essentially a pandemic waiting to happen. They said exactly that one of these organisms gets out and we will have a global coronavirus pandemic. They've reported that. They explained how the staff was underskilled, undertrained, and they didn't have enough adequately trained, skilled staff to run a level 4 laboratory, which is the highest security. And the other thing I'd like to say, there's heaps of evidence all around the world of these organisms escaping out of laboratories in virtually every country. And there's a very good paper published in Science, which is a high-level scientific journal, documenting the numerous examples of these deadly organisms that have escaped, and essentially saying it's just been luck that we haven't had a deadly pandemic from one of these escapes.
It's just luck. It's just luck that their key didn't fit our lock, really, is what you're saying.
Or some of them, though, like anthrax and smallpox and other things, could have really been a disaster, and they managed to get on top of it in time. But you're saying there's other ones too where the key hasn't fit the lock. But this time it looks like the luck has run out.
It's actually really frightening, because we live our lives and we think everything's okay. And I think you've made a really important point there, that it's not just in this time it happens to be the lab in China, but it's labs all over the world doing this research. And
exactly.
And escapes are commonplace. It's terrifying. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why people are sticking to it came from bats, because it's actually a more comforting narrative. It's just, it was out of our control. It's nothing to do with mankind. Nature, she's so unpredictable. But if you start looking at the fact that scientists could have created this and then through lax security released it into the world, that's a whole other kettle of fish. That's much harder for a lot of people to swallow.
Exactly. And if you look at who the people are who are saying this is natural, and we're looking at the military, we're looking at various government-funded research organizations, and most of them are actually involved in this gain-of-function research. They know if the truth came out, there'd be such public anger that this research would be stopped. And so it should be. And I think one of the really important things that needs to come out of this is that we need gain-of-function research stopped. This genetic modification of these viruses is wrong. It's creating new deadly organisms that have zero benefit. You know, the only thing they're designed to do is kill people. And it's, you know, not only is it a waste of billions of dollars over the years that could be used on much better things, it's now created the worst pandemic in our history. And, you know, we need to prevent it ever happening again, because believe me, what we know, there are far worse organisms sitting in these laboratories. If one of those escapes, it's going to make this COVID-19 look like a picnic.
Well, that's terrifying. And it brings me to the point that this research, you know, is kind of dribbling out. It's being published in scientific journals. It's not necessarily being discussed in any kind of open or transparent way in the media. But is there also a problem with the way information has been kind of dribbled out of China as well? I mean, is there a cover-up there, or is it just complete disorganization?
It's been a cover-up from day one, and we're unraveling it at the moment. But
and how do we know that?
How do we know? We know from right from the beginning. And can I say, China's worked with the World Health Organization on this cover-up. You know, they first admitted that there were a few cases of this new pneumonia, but they said it came from the seafood market, and that there's no evidence that it could be transmitted between human to humans. It comes directly from animals to humans, so there's no need to worry about it. At the same time, they were saying that, and the World Health Organization was parroting China's claims. China was jailing the doctors who were reporting on this new epidemic of pneumonia. And we know one of those doctors, you know, died in the end a month later, you know, and is a hero in China and should be a hero for the rest of us, because, you know, he went out of his way. He was jailed for telling the truth. So that's the first cover-up. We know that they covered up, you know, the first laboratory, this is on January the 11th, released the genome of this virus, because before that, they would not release the information on this virus to any other scientists in the world. And then a laboratory in Shanghai then published the genetics of it so other scientists could study it. They closed that laboratory down the next day on January 12, silenced the scientists. You know, we know in early February, a paper came out from two eminent scientists in China showing there was 0 bats in the Wuhan seafood market, and that the likely cause of this epidemic was a release from one of the 2 laboratories that were doing this research in Wuhan. It's not just one, there's 2 doing this research. And that paper got pulled. Chinese put pressure on all the places, or all the academic places that host it. It's not there, but fortunately we have copies of it and we've kept it, and others have. But those scientists have disappeared. Any scientist that's come out to try and tell the truth has disappeared or been silenced. We can see the cover-up is still happening. They've closed down the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They will not allow any independent scientists in, and it's been taken over by the military now. And also in China, any publication, any thing said about this virus has to go through their propaganda unit in Beijing. So everything coming out of China now is pure propaganda, including any so-called scientific study. It's officially, edited and approved by the propaganda unit from Beijing. So this is a grand scale cover-up. And then the other one is when my country proposed to have an independent investigation, put so much profit. Now they've got all these trade sanctions. They've stopped all our barley and meat, and they're putting trade pressure on us because of it. However, as of last night, the majority of countries in the world have agreed to an independent investigation into the source and cause of this and the cover-up.
It's interesting because we say we should be led by the science, and yet scientists that come up with evidence that doesn't fit the narrative are silenced. It's not just in COVID-19; it's in all parts of science. So I guess my question is, and we're kind of coming up to the end of our time together today, but a lot of people are saying that this pandemic is an opportunity for change, for changing the way we live and changing the way we think and changing the way we act and changing the way we farm. Do you believe that? And what do you think are the main lessons that we need to take away from this now? And how can we be better prepared next time?
Look, I fully agree. This now is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us not to go back to business as normal and reinvent the Green New Deal. And we need to start having an environmental economy, one that is caring, and I think really importantly, open and transparent. What we're seeing is a lack of transparency, and can I say scientific transparency. We need openness. We need the real facts published. We don't need the media suppressing things. This is what's happening. The whole issue of gain of function, you will not see it in any mainstream media. And yet gain of function research is one of the biggest threats we face. And gain of function research is the cause of this pandemic and will be the cause of future and even worse pandemics unless we put a stop to it. And I think we need a global campaign to end this type of genetic engineering. This is a disaster. It's been predicted for a long time, and now it's happening, and we're in the middle of it, and we need to make sure it never, ever happens again.
Andre, from your lips to God's ears, that's all I can say there. Thank you so much for going into such detail about this and for laying it out so clearly. Let's see what happens next, I think is all any of us can say. We're waiting for the next bit of information to come and help us be clear. So we may ask you back and talk a bit more about it.
I think you will. What we're uncovering at the moment will clearly give even more evidence to the point where actually we think we know the day the accident happened. Yeah. And we should have that clear within a week or two. So I'd be very happy to come back and go into more detail about what happened, when it happened, and who did it.
Fantastic. We'll look forward to that. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Ciao.
Bye-bye.